I'm not pulling in my driveway. We all know what that means. It's time for another drive to work, coronavirus edition. Okay, so I've been using my time at home to do interviews. Today I'm going way back to Antiquities, and I'm talking with Skaff Elias about the making of the second ever Magic expansion. Hey, Skaff.
Hey, how's it going?
Okay, so we're going way back. This is early Magic. So what is your memory? How did Antiquities first come to be?
How did Antiquities first come to be? That is a great question. So relatively early on, we knew we needed expansions. And Arabian Nights was, I think probably, it was certainly not out yet, but it was probably still in design maybe. And that was the one where of every set that has ever come out for Magic all time, that is the one most solely attributable to one person, even much more so than Alpha. Richard just went home and banged out Antiquities, and so it was looked over.
Arabian Nights. He made Arabian Nights.
Arabian Nights, right? Sorry. Yeah, and it was looked over, but I mean, it was barely looked over, and there were not very many changes made to that. So so for designing the next sets, that was so difficult for him to do alone. Peter really had asked us to form a team there among the playtesters at Penn, and come up with an expansion. So we looked around and asked people who wanted to participate, and we got the group together, and that was the origin of it.
So mostly it's the people you worked with from most of the sets you worked on, which is you and Jim Lynn, Chris Page, Dave Petty, except Joel Mick is also on this team, which is not normal for you guys.
That's correct. Yeah. He was added, and I can't exactly remember how that all came about. I mean, he was there, and he was a sharp guy, and we all knew him, and he was part of the general group, but anyway, yeah, he just got added.
Okay, so let me ask. So the first interesting thing about Antiquities, it's the first of a couple things. So we're going to talk about how these came to be. So first off, it's the first set to have a mechanical theme. Like Arabian Nights obviously had a flavor theme, but this is the first set that said we're about something mechanically. And for those that have never played Antiquities, it's very loud. It's about artifacts. So how did you get a mechanical theme?
Well, we had wanted to do mechanical themes, and in fact, even before that, Ice Age was designed before Antiquities to a large extent, and we had always talked about wanting to do mechanical themes for sets. So that part was kind of in the air for quite a while, and people loved artifacts, and so that was the idea, is like, well, that's a slam dunk mechanical theme because everybody loves artifacts because they're soft and weak and don't like to fix their mana properly.
And I mean, the other thing that's interesting is you guys went full throttle. Like every single card in the set has the word artifact on it, except for a couple of the lands, but they tap for colorless, so they clearly imply you're using the capped artifacts.
Yeah.
Why you? I mean, this is really strong. There's not a lot of sets we go this strong on a theme.
Right. So there's a couple reasons for that. One is obviously we wanted to make sure that the point got home. The sets back then were pretty small. There's not that many cards in the set.
85 unique cards in the set.
Yeah, and so the thing is that it's we had already had two expansions out, the big one and then the smaller one with Arabian Nights. Plus, in addition to that, there were more on the horizon. I think the next set after Antiquities is Legends.
Yeah.
And Legends is a big set. And so there's just going to be a lot of cards out there. We knew that we wanted it as a mechanical theme. We also knew that we probably weren't going to do another artifact set for a long time. So we're like, okay, let's get it out of the way and be done with this for at least a year or two, or whatever. So that's part of the reason for it. It also meshed with the flavor that we wanted in addition, although that was certainly a secondary concern.
Okay, so another thing the set did for the first time is it told a story, or at least it hinted at a story at bare minimum. How did that come about?
Well, that was the thing. I mean, I had wanted to do that for a long time. It was Magic had sort of been random up to then, and we had taken obviously we couldn't afford any sort of licenses, but Richard wanted a theme, and so he pulled from Arabian Nights because he had just been reading it, and we had talked about doing a King Arthur theme or stuff like that, stuff that was public domain. And I really wanted to develop our own story because I thought it would be able to mesh much better with mechanics. And we could make it do what we wanted it to do. And then also we could, build up sort of secondary products, around it. We could actually make the story interesting.
And the Brothers' War, how'd you get to the Brothers' War? How'd that happen?
Oh, yeah. So that was, we wanted to tie it to Alpha as much as we could. And so we looked at the artifacts that were in Alpha, and there's Ankh of Mishra and Urza's glasses. And so these are just random names that Richard had come up with. And so I think it was Richard. It's possible it was someone else, but I'm about 90% sure it was Richard. And then so we're like, okay, well, there's no purposeful story in Alpha, but there are some proper names. Let's tie it in as much as possible. So that's where we started. We wrote down a list of essentially all the proper nouns in the first in Alpha, and then and especially those dealing with artifacts, and then we just started the story from there. I mean, you want a conflict, and so there's a war, and you've got Urza and you've got Mishra. Now, why they were brothers, I think it's just some sort of standard, I don't know.
It's a common storytelling
trope, it wasn't like any of us hated our families or anything like that. So anyway, those are the origins.
So one of the things you did that was very interesting was it's not as if the story was told sort of modern day. It was kind of like you were glimpsing at a story that happened long in the past.
Yeah. So the thing is, when and I certainly have talked about this before. The thing that we were dealing with is later days. Like now, I mean, gosh, you guys have resources, and you can make movies or TV shows or web comics or novels or podcasts or whatever. There's a lot of magazines. None of that existed back then, right? The only means we had to tell that story were the cards. Literally nothing else. There was just no other way for it to come out. And also the nature of trading card games is such that, again, these days, you can sort of get the compilation of everything. But back then, you have to remember the vast majority of people would get 4 booster packs of Antiquities, right? I mean, that was their access to all of the information that they were going to get about the story. And so it's obviously difficult to tell a story under those circumstances. But even today, most people probably don't own the whole Magic set, and a lot of people don't necessarily follow up. So your access to the story is these glimpses that you get, and that's very similar actually to archaeology. So we thought about all this strategically and said, hey, it's kind of interesting, right? This is sort of the work that an archaeologist might do, right? They're getting bits and pieces of these various things. And the story isn't so exact. It's not like you're watching a movie or you have a narrative. You sort of piece it together. So we thought that was kind of interesting way for people to explore the story, and it matched their amount of access. So with that archaeological theme, a bunch of stuff came out of that. And again, this is all from the original idea of how do you tell a story, with 4 booster packs of cards. That's the origin of everything here. So we thought, okay, archaeology. So that meant it was in the past. We took you as the player, as the viewpoint of someone who either uncovered these artifacts or, was talking to someone who did in modern day. So everything was through these glimpses of artifacts, which is great because artifacts mechanically in Magic are, it's the same thing as artifacts today. So you have these, objects, not creatures generally, but objects buried, from a long time ago. So from there, the story developed into, well, this is before the 5 colors of magic first really 100% took their modern day forms, whatever that means. And so a lot of the first magic was indeed these ancient artifacts. Why is the history not complete? Well, the history is not complete because, there's basically Armageddon, a devastating war. So the stuff is not only old, but civilization has been destroyed. And there you go. Does that all make sense?
Yeah. The other thing I just want to make sure the audience understands is, at the time Antiquities came out, early on, Wizards was very secretive about what was in the set. So, like, right now, when a set comes out, you can see the spoiler and see all the cards. You didn't see the cards unless you opened a booster pack or you saw your friends' cards. So, like, it was back then, it's just important to understand that, like, when Skaff says, like, that's all you had, that is all you had. There's not even other resources to see the cards. So that was a very different world.
You could, by the time Antiquities came out, you could go on to the Usenet groups and you could get a list of all the cards.
But you couldn't, like, see the cards. Like, maybe someone could list what the cards were. You couldn't
see them. You could get the text from them. And so that was, but even then, you have to remember, that's a relatively small percentage of the players that had access to it that way. So it's not like it didn't exist. It was just like, maybe a couple % of the players had access to the list. And certainly, as you pointed out, no visuals, just text.
Okay, so I want to talk through some of the cards in the set and sort of see what your memory is of how they came to be.
Yeah.
So we're going to start with the Urzatron. So Urza's Tower, Urza's Factory, Urza's Tower, Urza's Power Plant, Urza's Mine. How did that come to be, those cards?
Right. So the thing with those, right, is that you wanted to have lands in Antiquities, and by the nature of the whole set, we wanted them to, generate colorless mana. So then you sort of start from there, and you say, like, oh, okay, well, if you tap a land for 1 mana. That's pretty lame. That's not good enough. And if you tap it for 2 colorless mana, that's too good. So then there you go. That's like, so how do you? And this isn't just Antiquities. This is like the history of Magic. Is you 1 colored mana is you can't go below generating 1 colored mana, because otherwise you would just play with a basic land, and generating doubles pretty difficult. You need to put a cost on it. So every land that's been designed properly since then is sort of somewhere in there, in that range.
But where'd you get the idea of, like, there's 3 lands, you got to get all 3 out? Like, where did that come from?
Oh, just some means of essentially, having you generate more than 1 colorless mana per land, and there's different costs you can do, right? Like, whatever. City of Brass, you took a damage, and at the time that had already been out, and so or you can come into play tapped, or there's different things that are the cost. Well, the cost for this was you had to have multiples. It meshed with the story, because we did actually want, the idea was the entire planet was essentially consumed in the war. That's this sort of like nightmarish kind of vision of these massive industrial camps gone crazy, and so that was part of what.
Okay, so here's a question that I've always wondered. So Mine taps for 2, Power Plant taps for 2, but Tower taps for 3. Why have the Tower tap for more than the Mine and the Power Plant?
Oh, just to add a little bit of texture to it, I think is mainly what's going on. I don't really think that we said, oh yeah, the proper cost instead of 222 is 223 or 234 or whatever. I'm sure we thought that it wasn't too good, and also that it was just a little more interesting if one of them was slightly more valuable. So it had to be the tower because that's where Urza is.
I see. So another thing that just to bring up, because the Urzatron cards do this. So on the lands, you had different art. I don't know if you had anything to do with this, but I'll ask. You know, any idea? This is the first time that Magic cards had multiple art for the same card. Do you have any idea why that was done?
I mean, it was done because they were sort of. Wait, that wasn't done for land in the basic set?
Well, I'm sorry. You're correct. You're correct. Alpha had the land in different art. You're right.
That's just been a standard part of land for that was printed in the commons.
Oh, okay, that's a good point.
Right. So like Arabians, right, doesn't have any common lands, right? Is that correct?
I think that's correct. Oh, desert. Desert's a common land. Oh, okay. And desert might have alternate art.
I think it's just as simple as that. Is if the land's on a printed multiple times on a sheet. So if it's printed multiple times on a sheet, it had multiple art.
Yeah, Arabian Night. Well, Arabian Night was also desert was weird because the way the sheets work. But okay, that's interesting.
Sorry. There's nothing that the true first alternate art was Fallen Empires.
Right, Fallen Empires is when beyond the land. Right. Okay.
Right.
Okay. Next, as we're talking about land, let's talk about another land.
Sorry for that story not being more interesting.
No. Hey, sometimes the answer is there's a very clean, simple answer. It's like okay. I like clean, simple answers. I have nothing wrong with that.
As simple as you get.
Okay, so another land. We'll talk some other lands. Mishra's Factory. Where did that come from?
That's the land that becomes a creature.
Yeah, you activate, make it a 2/2 assembly worker.
Yeah. I don't know if there were precursor cards that fit that mechanic, but the idea of being able to change from one classification to another to avoid the sweepers was, essentially the idea there. Again, Mishra's Factory, it's not good enough if it only does a colorless, so you have to add an extra power to it, and the extra power was avoiding the...
Right, I just, Donovan, for the audience who might not know these cards, Mishra's Factory taps for one colorless. You can tap it to give any assembly worker +1/+1, and for 1 mana, you can turn it into a 2/2 assembly worker.
Right, and so that turned out, poor Urza, his stuff really never made it very far past Antiquities, his lands. But
Mishra, the Urzatron does see play in certain formats. Not that Mishra's Factory isn't good, and we'll get to Mishra's Workshop in a second. But Mishra outshone Urza a little bit in the lands.
Well, and also, I think the best of all of them is the Strip Mine, probably.
Well, okay. How did Strip Mine come about?
How did Strip Mine come about? Again, you sit down and you divvy up the lands between Urza and Mishra, and I will say that one thing is that the idea was Urza was the good guy and Mishra was the bad guy. More or less. Neither of them are.
They're a little gray at times.
Paragons of virtue, but so Urza's stuff isn't destructive, right? It's just generating. It's just generating mana, and for Mishra's stuff, right? The Strip Mine is destructive. It's destroying land. It sort of fit the flavor of Strip Mine, and also.
I should tell the audience. Strip Mine, for those that don't know, is you tap for 1 colorless, or you can tap it to destroy a land.
Right, and then
you sack it to destroy a land.
Right, and then the same thing with the factory where those lands die obviously a lot more than normal lands do.
Okay, so one other, so probably the most powerful of the lands, is a card called Mishra's Workshop. You tap to add 3 colors to your mana pool, but you can only use it to cast artifacts.
Right.
Where memory of this card?
No, it's just pretty. I mean, it's just pretty standard. Back then when it came out, it was much less powerful than it is now. And part of that was sort of the original design idea behind artifacts which over the years has certainly been blurred, is that an artifact should essentially be worse at doing whatever it's doing than the worst color, right? So if you have a creature in blue, blue's creatures back then were pretty bad. Of course, again, I know that's also changed somewhat, but so the idea was, well, why would you ever play a blue creature if you could just play an artifact instead that was just as good or better? So at the time, artifacts were, in general, they either did something that the colored cards didn't do, so they had their own unique thing. But if they did something that a color card could or would do, then the artifact had to be worse at it than the worst color. So that was Richard's constraint from the very beginning, because otherwise, like I said, a lot of the cards inside colors become obsolete. So at the time, Mishra's Workshop certainly wasn't, what it later became.
But I will say, even within this set, there are some powerful artifacts in this set, right?
There are, but most of the time, they're going to be doing something that, and I'm not saying we didn't screw up or whatever, but most of the time they're going to be doing something that color wouldn't do.
Okay, so let's just talk a few of the powerful artifacts.
A few of the things that are going to make what I just said be a lie.
Well, they're memorable from the set because they're powerful, obviously.
Yeah.
So like Candelabra of Tawnos, do you remember how this? So for the audience that might not know this,
no idea what Candelabra of Tawnos. I don't even remember that. Is that the one that?
So it costs one. It costs one X.
Yeah.
X and untap X separate lands.
Right. So that is definitely, the idea for that was to use it with like the Urzatron.
Yeah.
Right, because the interesting thing about the Candelabra of Tawnos is, I believe before Antiquities, there were no lands that generated more than one mana.
I do not believe that is correct. I believe that's correct.
So the Candelabra of Tawnos is bad unless that's the case, right?
Unless you had a set that also had lands to produce more than one mana.
Well, there was the giant growth, or something along those lines.
There was, yes, in the original. There was an enchantment that you could make a land produce 2 mana.
So it wasn't like it was completely useless outside of Antiquities, but obviously the main, because it's a terrible card. If all your mans are producing one mana, it's a pretty bad card. So this is really designed to, help you power all the wacky lands here.
Okay, another very powerful card was called Ivory Tower. Costs 1. During your upkeep, you gain 1 life for each card in your hand above 4.
Right.
Do you remember the origin of this card?
Yeah, the origin is, the origin is that we wanted life gain, and the Ivory Tower, again, it's supposed to be at least reminiscent of Urza's Tower. And the thing is that it's, at the time in Magic, actually, 99% of life gain in Magic is terrible.
Yeah.
and that's on purpose, right? Sorry for those of you who like life gain. That's on purpose just because of time considerations and stalemates and everything. So this was sort of pushing the boundaries as to what we thought you could do with life gain. Because if you're just playing it straight up and you don't have a really, really clever strategy, it's kind of a terrible card because you don't gain life unless you're not playing cards.
Yeah.
So that's the idea. It was, at the time it was like, you either need to do it really, really, really cleverly, or it's a sucker card.
Was the card designed as an anti-black vice? Was that conscious?
It was certainly meant to be parallel, and counter it, but it wasn't really. It wasn't like, oh man, we need to counter Black Vice. So it was just supposed, it's just some sort of aesthetically parallel, basically, I think is the main.
Okay, so the next card I want to talk to was a very influential card in that it did something Magic hadn't done, and since then it's just become part of the game, which is Millstone. So for the audience, artifact that costs 2 and tap, and you mill 2. You mill target player for 2. Where did this come from? Obviously milling's become a thing. Like Magic just does milling all the time now. But this was the first card that ever did it.
Right. So originally, in Magic, in the very first, version of the rules, probably the very first version of the rules, running out of cards didn't kill you until it happened the first time, and Richard was like, okay, well, we need a rule. So it was in there not as a true alternate win condition, because you weren't really supposed to get that far. It was mostly like, well, if something's gone wrong in the game, there is a way to make sure it ends, because, we certainly hit those very early on in playtest. And so we have this alternate victory condition sitting there. So we're like, hey, let's go ahead and use it. Let's play with it. And so Millstone, I think, is one of the, it's kind of interesting because it's, I think, it was pretty well designed.
Oh yeah, it is amazing how you are the right power level way back then, and like we just printed today. It's so.
Yeah. It's kind of unusual, right? You look at all these old cards, and it is sort of unusual to have a card like, oh, sure, a Black Lotus or a Mox or whatever, and there's so many cards, or Shiva Dragon was supposed to be so powerful, and then it turns out to not be, and so sort of to get the power level right is, I don't know, it was good. It was, and we did test it a lot. I mean, we really worked at it, the number of extra turns you would expect and what you were giving up and everything like that. Although I think certainly it was more lucky than good.
Okay. The last card I want to talk about was very controversial when the set came out. And there's actually a funny story about Richard going to interview somebody about making a game, and it's like, I hope you don't make a broken card like the card we're about to talk about.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
So it's Ornithopter. Dun, dun, dun. So it costs 0 for a 0/2 flying creature. So this was the first, I think, there were Moxes and stuff. This is the first creature maybe that cost 0?
Right, because, see, a Mox couldn't kill you.
Well, Ornithopter can't really kill you either, but...
but you can put an unstable mutation on it.
Yes, you can.
So, yeah, it's interesting. People always asked us if we, had mathematical formulas, and they would come up with these formulas for the value of a card. And this also... This Ornithopter exposed the lack of value among playtesters. I don't know how much you guys experience that today. People know a lot more about the game than they did back then. But we would send these cards out to general playtest, and the comments we would get back on Ornithopter were like, you can't do this, you've broken the game. And, it's just because our formulas show that it's infinitely good, right? Because there would be some sort of division by 0 error there. And it's like, well, yeah, maybe instead of concentrating on formulas, you should concentrate on maybe thinking. But it was unbelievable. Like, even at the time, when it was first proposed, the people on the team were like, wait, we can't really do that. And I'm like, let's think about it, because I think you can. There was this realization there that the main cost of a card, of course, is your draw. It's costing you
a card,
the opportunity cost. Yeah. And that's why, Ice Age, even though it was not in a decent form, Ice Age had the cantrips, which sort of played around with the cost of a card being a card, and Force of Will did it in the opposite direction. But Ornithopter was this, really sort of brought it home initially, where it's like, okay, here's the deal. The mana cost isn't the real cost of the card, and it looks cool, right? I mean, it's just awesome. And then there was certainly the thought that at 0 mana cost, maybe at some point it can be used for some infinite loop somehow. And
it was. There's a very famous deck called Fruity Pebbles that used you used 0 drop creatures, but Ornithopter was one of them. It was just infinitely cycle, and the fact that 0 means
because we not only weren't we scared of combos, as is obvious with Candelabra of Tanos and the Urzatron and stuff like that. We wanted them to be a solid part of the game for people to build up to these crazy combos, just as long as it was sufficiently difficult. Well, I do remember the playtest group said, well, what if you had a deck that was nothing but islands, Ornithopters, and unstable mutations? And because we said, the Ornithopter is not infinitely good. And I mean, it wasn't just one playtest group. It was multiple playtest groups with it.
I mean, even when the set came out, I was on the outside. I have to stress, by the way, before I came to Wizards, my favorite set was Antiquities. I loved Antiquities. And I remember when Ornithopter came out, there were people that like, they can't print that. And I have arguments with people. I'm like, so how is it broken? Like, what did, and it's like this hypothetically broken rather than actually practically broken.
Yeah. So, no, we just asked them to all submit decks. And of course, none of them ever were any good.
Okay, so I can see my desk here, so I'm almost to work. But any final thoughts on Antiquities?
I do remember it being very fun to work on. It was a great group of people, and I thought working on the story was fun, and it was very interesting because that was one of the times where there was a lot of back and forth between the story and the cards, where like, oh, well, you've got 4 blue cards and you need a 5th one, and you've run through all your mechanics, and then let's fill in a story gap, or vice versa. So it was good. It was really extremely enjoyable to work on, and I'm very happy how most of it turned out. Given what we knew at the time, obviously, like.
Oh yeah. I mean,
set design is obviously a lot. People are a lot better at doing stuff than they were back then, but the amount of knowledge we had was close to zero.
No, like I said, I adored Antiquities. I just think there's so much fun stuff in it, and yeah, I always loved artifacts, and it really was. In some ways, this is one of the sets that really inspired me. So it's fun for me to go back, because a lot of the times when I'm doing these interviews, I was involved in making the set, and I was a player for this set. I remember playing it, but I had nothing to do with making it. So
like you're approaching it as a little kid.
Yeah. I have such fond memory. I don't know. It just. I mean, I remember the first time I saw Triskelion, I just thought it was the most amazing thing in the world.
Yeah. No, it was. I'm glad that you had fun with it. I think a lot of people did.
Well, thank you, Skaff. But guys, thank you for joining us. But I see my desk, so we all know what that means. So instead of talking magic, it's time for me to be making magic. So once again, Skaff, thank you so much for being here.
Awesome. Great to be here.
And all of you, I will see you next time. Bye-bye.
All right.